In the year 1734, Bristol stood as England's second city, a place of global consequence built on steep hills and tidal waters. Ships from 4 continents crowded its floating harbor. Wealth moved through its streets in the form of sugar, tobacco, wine, and human beings. The city held perhaps 40,000 souls, and every stone and timber structure reflected the appetite of an empire still expanding. This was not a city frozen in time. It was a machine of commerce, faith, and survival, operating under rules that would seem both familiar and alien to those who walk its streets today. What made Bristol unusual was not its grandeur but its geography. The River Avon carved through limestone gorge and tidal marsh before spilling into the Severn estuary. Ships had to navigate the Avon's twisting course for several miles inland, passing beneath cliffs and through narrow channels where the water rose and fell by more than 30 feet with each tide. The city itself clung to slopes and ridges, its streets climbing sharply from the quays. There was no flat ground. Every journey involved ascent or descent, and the effort shaped the rhythm of daily life. The medieval core still dominated the landscape. Within the old walls, churches rose above timber-framed houses that leaned toward one another across lanes barely wide enough for a handcart. St. Mary Redcliffe, with its soaring spire, marked the southern edge of the city. The tower could be seen from miles away, a declaration of civic pride and accumulated merchant wealth. Beside it, ships unloaded directly onto cobbled quays. The sound of hammering, shouting, and grinding winches filled the air from dawn until the light failed. The quays themselves were a study in organized chaos. Hogsheads of sugar stood stacked in pyramids. Barrels of wine from Bordeaux and Madeira waited for inspection. Bales of tobacco from the Chesapeake colonies released their sharp, earthy scent into the damp air. Men moved these goods with ropes, levers, and sheer physical strength. There were no steam engines, no mechanized cranes. Human muscle and animal labor powered every transaction. Boys ran messages between merchants. Clerks with ink-stained fingers recorded weights and values in ledgers that determined fortunes. Above the quays, the city spread in concentric rings of wealth and squalor. The grand houses of merchants occupied the slopes with views over the harbor. These were structures of dressed stone with sash windows, classical doorways, and iron railings. Inside, rooms were paneled in oak or lined with imported wallpaper. Fires burned in every grate during winter months. Servants moved through back stairs and service corridors, invisible until needed. These homes were statements of status, built with profits extracted from sugar plantations in Jamaica and slave trading voyages to the coast of West Africa. Below and between these mansions, the lanes grew narrow and dark. Timber houses from the previous century still stood, their upper floors projecting over the street to maximize interior space. Families lived in single rooms. Privies emptied into open drains that ran down the center of alleyways. The smell of human waste, rotting vegetables, and tanning leather was constant. Water came from public wells or was carried in buckets from the river. Disease moved quickly through these dense neighborhoods. Smallpox, typhus, and dysentery killed without regard for age or previous health. Infant mortality was high enough that most families expected to bury at least one child. The working population rose before dawn. Dockers, porters, sailors, and laborers gathered at the quays hoping for a day's wage. Bakers lit their ovens. Butchers opened their shutters. Market women carried baskets of vegetables and fish from outlying villages. The city's economy depended on this circulation of goods and labor. There was no safety net. Those who could not work had few options beyond charity or crime. The marketplace near the old High Cross was the city's public stage. Here, farmers sold butter and cheese. Fishwives offered herring and mackerel. Cloth merchants displayed woolens and linens. The air was thick with competing voices. Transactions involved haggling, testing, and careful examination of every item. Trust was limited. Weights and measures were checked. Coins were bitten to test their metal. The marketplace was also a place of punishment. The pillory stood ready for petty criminals. Public whippings and brandings occurred on market days, serving as entertainment and warning. The churches structured not only the skyline but also the week. Sunday services were mandatory. Absence invited scrutiny and suspicion. The Church of England held official authority, but dissenters worshipped in their own meeting houses, often in less prominent locations. These divisions mattered. Religious affiliation affected business relationships, marriage prospects, and social standing. Bristol had a significant Quaker population, and their refusal to remove hats or swear oaths marked them as both principled and stubborn. Catholic worship was illegal, though individual Catholics lived quietly within the city, attending Anglican services publicly while maintaining their faith in private. The slave trade was woven into the fabric of Bristol's economy with a directness that left no institution untouched. Ships left the harbor loaded with manufactured goods, textiles, metalware, and gunpowder. They sailed to the coast of West Africa, where these items were exchanged for enslaved men, women, and children. The ships then crossed the Atlantic to the Caribbean or the American colonies, where the enslaved were sold. The vessels returned to Bristol carrying sugar, rum, tobacco, and cotton. This triangular trade generated immense wealth for a small number of families. Their names appeared on public buildings, charitable foundations, and church memorials. The human cost was invisible to most Bristol residents, occurring thousands of miles away in spaces they would never see. The harbor itself was a source of both prosperity and frustration. The extreme tidal range meant ships could only enter or leave during certain hours. At low tide, vessels sat on mud, listing to one side, waiting for the water to return. Cargoes had to be unloaded quickly. Delays cost money. Captains and merchants watched the sky and consulted tide tables with the intensity of generals planning campaigns. Proposals to create a floating harbor, a dock that would maintain constant water levels, were already being discussed. It would take decades to build, but the need was clear to anyone who worked the waterfront. Violence was closer to the surface than in later centuries. Tavern fights were common. Sailors carried knives. Disputes over money or reputation could turn deadly within moments. The city had no professional police force. Watchmen patrolled at night, but they were often elderly men armed only with staffs and lanterns. Serious crimes were dealt with harshly. Theft of goods worth more than a shilling could result in hanging. Public executions drew large crowds. The bodies of executed criminals were sometimes left hanging in chains as a deterrent. Justice was swift, public, and brutal. The wealthier classes insulated themselves through architecture and routine. They moved between home, church, and counting house in sedan chairs carried by hired men. Their children were educated by tutors or sent to private schools. Social life revolved around assemblies, card parties, and formal dinners. Marriages were negotiations between families, concerned with property and alliance more than affection. Women of this class managed households but had limited legal rights. A married woman's property belonged to her husband. Divorce was nearly impossible. Widowhood often brought the first taste of economic independence. Below this layer, the middling sort worked as shopkeepers, skilled craftsmen, and clerks. They lived above their businesses, rising early and closing late. Apprentices slept in attics and worked for years without wages, learning trades that might eventually allow them to establish their own shops. Guilds still regulated many trades, controlling who could practice and under what conditions. This system protected established masters but made it difficult for outsiders to enter the market. The city's physical expansion was limited by topography and land ownership. Suburbs grew slowly along the roads leading out of the medieval center. New streets were laid out on land that had previously been fields or orchards. Building was piecemeal, driven by individual speculation rather than planning. There were no zoning laws, no regulations about building standards. Fires were a constant risk. Timber structures burned easily, and narrow streets made firefighting difficult. The city had fire engines, but they were hand-pumped and required large crews to operate. Bristol's connection to the wider world was both its strength and its vulnerability. Wars disrupted trade routes. French privateers attacked merchant ships in the Channel. Changes in tariffs or colonial policies in London could ruin businesses overnight. The city's merchants watched political developments closely, lobbying members of parliament and cultivating relationships with officials who controlled licenses and monopolies. Power in Bristol was concentrated in the hands of a few dozen families who served as aldermen, vestrymen, and magistrates. They governed through networks of obligation and mutual interest. The streets themselves told stories. Names like Corn Street, Wine Street, and Broad Street reflected centuries of commercial activity. The old castle had been demolished decades earlier, its stone reused for other buildings. The city walls were crumbling in places, no longer necessary for defense. New construction incorporated old foundations. History was not preserved but recycled, built over, and adapted to present needs. As evening approached, the pace of activity slowed. Shops closed, taverns filled. Oil lamps and candles provided the only light. The wealthy dined by candlelight in paneled rooms. The poor ate whatever they could afford by the glow of a single tallow candle. Darkness came early in winter, and the cold was intense in houses without central heating. Families gathered around fires, rationing fuel to make it last through the night. Bristol in 1734 was a city of sharp contrasts operating under systems of authority and exploitation that were accepted as natural by most who lived within them. It was a place where fortunes were made and lives were discarded, where beauty and brutality coexisted without apparent contradiction. The physical city that existed then is mostly gone, replaced by later construction, bombing damage, and modern development. What remains are fragments. A church tower, a merchant's house preserved as a museum, street patterns that follow medieval lanes. To walk through Bristol today is to move through layers of vanished worlds. The harbor is quiet now, filled with pleasure boats rather than merchant ships. The grand houses have been divided into flats or converted to offices. The alleys where the poor lived have been demolished or gentrified beyond recognition. Yet something of that earlier city persists in the placement of buildings, the curve of streets, the relationship between water and stone. History leaves marks that are difficult to erase completely. What remains most vividly is the knowledge that this city, like all cities, was built by human effort and shaped by human choices. The people of 1734 believed their world would endure. They could not have imagined the transformations that would come within a few generations. Their certainty is a reminder of our own impermanence. We live in structures that will one day seem as distant and strange as their world appears to us. If you found yourself walking these streets, what do you think would strike you first? Let me know in the comments.